One of the things that I hear from my clients who go from clinic to admin, whether that's 100 to 0, 0 to 100, or some type of hybrid where it's
Right.
like AI is
Right.
still in practicing in the C-suite as well. One of the biggest culture shocks for them is the politics. And I'd love for you to react to this. Physicians, in my experience, physicians are very efficient, which means I'm just going to go to the place that gets the thing done that I need the quickest. That's not how the business world works. I often tell physicians, if you're going into the big meeting, what's even more important than that is the meeting before the meeting, right? And so the politics is, I think, a layer of the reality of being an executive that physicians are just not ready for or very surprised by. What's your reaction to that?
Two parts. That's a fabulous question. A physician executive can be exploited in the same way because they haven't been in the universe of admin long enough to know what are the perks of admin. How does an administrator get work done? Because we're brought up by a fee-for-service productivity model, we are, to your point, constantly always getting stuff done. The problem is in the C-suite and the surrounding levels of the C-suite, that's not how people work. And they'll sit back and watch you just work your tail off. We love having that person on the team because we can sit back and have more meetings while that person gets. So I do think there's a real risk of being exploited, which then goes to the second point, is if you hire me to be your CMO, I want to be developed to be just like the team behaves. I want to know how to delegate. I want to know how to be at the meeting before the meeting. I want to be part of the politics of it. I want to be strategically thinking like you are. And if you just hire me to be a fireman and one day you think I'm going to be the fire chief, hell no, I want to be the fire marshal. I want to be on top of the firehouse and top of all the firemen and firewomen. That's why we call it the Fire Chief Podcast, because we want to elevate people all the way to that marshal level. So I think the same risks occur that you're not asking the right questions because you don't know the landscape and you are not treated fairly because you didn't know it. That's my response. Hello and welcome to the Fire Chief Podcast, the only podcast dedicated to the Chief Medical Officer. I'm your host, Lee Scheinbart, now produced by the CMO Group, and together we bring you the most crucial conversations in healthcare and physician leadership. Today's show is devoted to the power of advocacy, specifically for physicians who are seeking an upward trajectory and want to be sure that their voice is heard when the career moment of truth finally arrives. We have found a dynamite individual for just that purpose, one who has been on many other podcasts sharing his expertise, but he has never been on our show. Our guest today is Ethan Nkana, the founder and principal of the Rocky Mountain Physician Agency. After earning both his JD and MBA from the University of Dayton, Ethan spent over a decade on the administrative side of healthcare, analyzing and negotiating physician contracts for hospitals. He witnessed firsthand the disparities physicians face during negotiations, leading to undervalued compensation and unmet professional goals. Determined to level the playing field, he founded Rocky Mountain Physician Agency with a very simple mission statement: physicians first, always. Ethan and his team believe that physicians, like professional athletes, deserve dedicated representation to advocate for their best interests when it is time to secure their next role. Ethan, welcome to the show.
Dr. Scheinbart, longtime listener, first-time guest. I am excited to be here with you.
You are the man. I am so pleased to have you on. I'm also very, very sorry about your Denver Broncos playoff disappointment. I'm not really that sorry, but I did want to say that. I am a lifelong Cleveland Browns fan, so there's just like zero room in my heart for the Broncos organization. You may be a little too young to understand that, but there's plenty of room in my heart for you to join us, okay? So I won't hold it against you.
Don't they say something about glass houses and throwing stones? My memory slips me at the moment.
No, you're spot on about that, and I'm gonna throw some stones until we get to the Super Bowl, one way or the other. Listen, as I thought about the things we talked about not too long ago, I really cannot stress how important I think your work is when it comes to advocating for physicians stepping into their career. And I'm hoping by the way of this conversation that others will will see the value of your experience and what you literally bring to the table. To be fair, some of my colleagues who employ physicians and physician leaders, they may have a little heartburn about what we're going to talk about, perhaps. But again, as a lifelong Browns fan, their suffering is trivial compared to mine, and trivial to what you just went through in your season. So we'll excuse all of that, and I really hope that we can bring some value to all the listeners. So you ready for this?
Yeah, let's do it. And the thing I'm most excited about, Dr. Scheinbart, is to talk about the reality of what we see through the lens of our experience, right? Because when I was on the hospital side, I had a very strong perspective about how I thought things worked. And now that I see things from the other side, my perspective is broadened. So I'm really excited to talk about the nitty-gritty of what physician leaders experience in the trenches, frankly.
Perfect, perfect. Well, you have, to me, a very compelling walk-up story, your walk-up song, if you will. How did you end up in this space? It sounded very personal when I heard it. Will you share that with our listeners?
My mom, who is an anesthesiologist, often tells me I didn't have a choice in what I do now. And I would say it's a combination of watching her as a physician, growing up and seeing, I mean, even on weekends, seeing her in scrubs and rush into the hospital for an emergency case. And when I was in high school, she was adamant about me going to medical school, becoming a doctor, kind of following in her footsteps. I don't think she appreciated my lack of academic aptitude. And so as a result, I
Actually,
took
she
a
may have really appreciated and doubled down on it, but that might be another story.
yeah, there you go. Like I'm only hearing it through the lens of her softening the story for me. So there could be a version that she hasn't told me yet. But in high school, she told me, you've got to get into medicine. That really, I'm not inclined to the sciences, frankly. And so I ended up going a different but similar route where I ended up becoming a hospital executive. So first job, intern, HR, did finance, operations, strategy. When I was in, law school, I also worked in physician contracting at a local health system. And all of that kind of came together into what I do now, which is representing physicians in contract negotiations. So, the breadcrumbs along the way are business school, law school, working in hospitals for 10 plus years. Those are all things that I didn't quite appreciate built into literally my exact job description today.
There is no substitute for having someone in medicine raise you up. The things you saw, as you described, your mom rushing to the hospital in scrubs for an important case, that becomes very visceral, very real as part of your identity. And then you go ahead and work in healthcare, regardless of how many degrees you have, that you really got a first hand experience with those tensions, those challenges, and being able to see it from both sides. I consider you very unique, notwithstanding your educational background as well. You are positioned to provide help to those that are seeking it from whatever side of an equation somebody comes to. So again, I once again appreciate where you're coming from and what you bring. And I'm going to ask you another very specific question. If I remember, you've probably worked with over 1,000 or 1,500 first-time physicians looking at their rookie contract. And even if that number is only a fraction of that, there are clearly blind spots that physicians bring when they're talking about their first contract. What do you consistently see along those lines of blind spots for physicians?
The reason that number is so big is because I've found over the last, almost 6 years now, running my practice, that physicians do not get education on contracts and the business of medicine and training. And so I have made it my mission to get in front of as many first-time attendings to talk about exactly this topic, which is, what do you need to make sure you look out for? So I often say the big three is where physicians should spend their energy. And a quick caveat that I think is really important for your listeners specifically. When I talk to physicians, one of the first things I ask them is, talk to me about your goals, your priorities, what's important to you. 9 times out of 10, what they do is just start repeating the job offer to me. Well, they're offering me this many dollars, this many days, and this. It's like, no, like that's, you're conditioned to think your circumstance is actually what you want. And I try to help physicians shift their mindset to, what do you need to practice at the top of your license? What do you need to make sure that you are living a fulfilled life? And then each portion of your life gets the best version of you. So for me, the big three that physicians often don't think about or miss is life balance. Think about your patient contact hours, your call schedule, your OR time if you're a surgeon, block time, things like that. Your practice support. So not just, hey, do I have an MA, but do I also need a mid-level? Do I have a dedicated scheduler? Do I have someone to do prior authorizations? Those all factor into a physician's quality of life and your ability to practice at the top of your license. Now, there's another layer to that with your physician leaders that we'll talk about hopefully later, but this is just the foundation, right? And then the last piece is just fair pay, right? And professional development. So making sure that your pay is in line with the market, is in line with your similarly situated colleagues, and that you have the support to go from a rookie physician to an experienced physician, and then potentially on to a leader or a physician executive, if that's the path you decide to go down.
That's excellent. So basically, the big three: can I perform at the highest level of where I'm at? Do I have the support to help me do all of that, and I'm not bogged down in it? And is it fair, right? Love it.
100%. You nailed it.
Great. Okay. So when physicians are looking at these offers of employment and they tend to laser in on what they're being paid or what that base salary looks like, and you help them step back and then prioritize, what parts of the contract really do help determine the long-term earning power and the career flexibility that they should also be thinking about even at that very first contract?
That is such a timely question, because I've had 2 phone calls with experienced physicians today about the exact same thing. And it's exit strategy. It is planning your exit strategy. In very simple terms, that means, how do I get out of the contract for a good reason, which is called for cause termination? How do I get out of the contract for any reason or no reason? And overwhelmingly, I am starting to get more and more phone calls about physicians saying, Ethan, I can't stay here any longer, but if I leave now, they're going to come after me for X number of dollars. Or the call I had with the physician this morning, Ethan, they're coming after me for $50K. What are my options here? I got to feed my family and I'm going back to training. So there's so much strain and pressure around, how do I get out of my contract safely? Physicians often say to me, Ethan, I've got to get out of this contract as fast as possible. My correction is, you need to get out of the contract as safely as possible. And what that specifically means is, with the minimum amount of exposure in terms of lawsuit, being sued by your practice, and with minimal financial penalties. Those are the things that I'm thinking about. So that is one of the biggest long-term penalties that I see physicians struggle with. Also, long-term contracts. So for the first time in my career, I saw a 10-year contract. And I've done this for a long time from both sides. I saw a 10-year contract. It was a group of OBGYN physicians who had a private practice relationship with a hospital for 10 years. And so you and I understand that for 10 years, that those physicians' pay is not going to change, even though their costs are climbing, their workload is climbing, their responsibility and leadership is climbing, but their pay stays the same. And I think, unfortunately, it may not be 10-year contracts, but that synopsis is the story for many physicians. They're being asked to do more and more, but given less time and less resources to do it.
Unfortunately, that is true, but you make a very compelling statement, and I'll use a phrase, and I know this is not your law specialty, but it sounds like a prenuptial agreement. You want to be able to safely separate. Boy, you're smiling when I say that for
I
those
love
who
that. I love that. That's great.
you can have that one. Listen, there's a moment though, as you're contemplating this first entry into that contract, the big three that we've already talked about. That can I perform my best? Am I supported to do that? And it's things, and now this where we're talking about, and if I leave, will I still have career success in a safe, equitable, non-punitive manner, so to speak? And is that what you're talking about?
100%. And one of the things that I've learned, how my messaging has evolved over the years of doing this, from seeing this through the lens of physicians going through this, is you must do something before you break. Physicians have an incredibly high pain threshold and tolerance for discomfort. And so, and because of how you prioritize patients over everything else, it creates a system where you can be exploited and taken advantage of. And so as a result, what then happens is the practice, the hospital will take as much from you as you allow them to. And just again, this afternoon, I talked to a physician where I have to be very direct with the physician and say, I know you told me you're not in a place where you're ready to take action. What I'm telling you is something's going to break. Hopefully it's not you, but something is going to break. I've seen this movie before. And then, of course, like clockwork, you get that phone call like, Ethan, it's gone south since we talked. Yeah. Like, I mean, I don't get any pleasure out of saying I told you so. But at the same time, it's just like, I don't know how to make it without just the actual pain. I don't know how to make it clear to physicians, like, it's not going to get better. It rarely gets better without you actually having to take action.
We will apply that to physician leaders in just a moment. I think exploitation occurs at the leadership level as well. And these are important points. So we're going to come back to that. So let's talk a little bit about some of the dissatisfaction that happens within that first 2 or 3 year contract. And the physician is feeling as though, as you stated, it is time for me to leave. And how is it that you might help predict, again, not the I told you so, but you're trying to prepare someone for the safe entry, the fair entry, and the safe exit. While the compensation may look fantastic and everything else is going great, you may be able to predict dissatisfaction. And how do you envision that in terms of contractual language, or set somebody up to be dissatisfied? So you want to clear that out of the contract.
If I were to create an album of the greatest hits of the reasons that physicians call me, the pain points, at the tracks 1 and 2 would be schedule and consistent, reliable practice support. To put a fine point on it, I had a physician call me one time and she was frantic. It was a Friday afternoon and she said, Ethan, I'm the only human in the clinic right now aside from my patients. So she was doing intake, she was doing checkout, she was doing all of the things that normally you would expect your support team to do. So that's what I mean when I say inconsistent, reliable support in your practice.
So when physicians who are entering into these early contracts and they don't have that experience, and you're helping them to understand, that goes back to your first principles. I want to be the best type of doctor in this setting that I can be. Will you support me to do that? And if time management is lacking or practice support is lacking, you would predict that there will be some level of dissatisfaction, which is clearly why you put it in that top 3, right?
Yeah. And to be really specific about the time piece, it is not physicians' fault. What tends to happen is a physician, commonly will say, I have 4 to 4.5 days of patient contact time, which leaves 1 to a 0.5 day of admin time, generally, rough math. What then tends to happen is 2 things. The practice will say, hey, Dr. Scheinbart, actually, I know we talked about 4 days of clinic, but we actually need to double book you and we need you to open up that another half day for add-ons or for whatever, walk-ins or whatever the case is. So now there's some creep, right? What we initially agreed to is no longer the goalpost. The other thing that tends to happen is a physician may say, and they may make a decision to join the practice on this point. They may say, because of my life balance, I want Q6 call, which means generally like 1 in 6. That could mean 1 week out of every 6, 1 day out of every 6, depending on your specialty. And so what'll happen is one of those 6 physicians in the practice will leave, and the practice will take their sweet time filling it. And guess what happens with that call schedule? It goes from 1 in 6 to now 1 in 5, right? So now you're working more in the clinic, you're working more after hours. How long is that sustainable? So I don't in any way intend to give the impression that it's physicians managing their time as much as time restrictions being imposed upon them that become increasingly unsustainable.
Yeah, no, you make perfect sense to me. I've been on both sides. I've been both an employed physician and I've employed people. And clearly there are nuances that creep right into your daily workflow that tend to violate your sense of this is not what I signed up for. You're making me work harder with less free time or picking up more call. We didn't agree to it. And then as you indicate, the conversation then turns into, yeah, and we didn't write that in the contract. So we're asking you to be flexible with us, but you're still under contract. So you almost have no recourse because it's not written in black and white, right?
100%. And you'll hear the magic words, be a team player, Dr.
Right.
Scheinbart.
Right.
Be a team player.
So my word of advice to those that were like me in the role of employing physicians, be equitable, be fair up front. Go ahead and write that language in early. You'll save both of you a lot of heartache if you have clarity around things that are outside of your control. Look, people get sick. Doctors, they have to leave practice because they get an illness, and who has to pick up that work? So you have to be clear about that. So this is, again, is very helpful, I think, for both sides of it. But I do want to pivot now to talking about emerging physician leaders who have been employed for 20 years, but now they've become a medical director, or they're ready to become an associate chief medical officer, chief medical officer, and give up the clinical realm. And they're not going to have any kind of RVU productivity. They're going to be full on administration. How might an emerging physician leader begin to think about how they're going to negotiate? Is it the same 3 items? Is it also protected time? What about a leadership development pathway, the governance model? What are the thoughts that come to mind when you're dealing with that?
Yeah, I would love for us to really construct together kind of a model here, because I think the lens of your lived experience would be really helpful to color in kind of the outline that I have through the physicians that I get to work with. As you were saying that, I kept thinking it's still the same 2 things, right? It's still my support for professional development and my time, my life balance. And I think there are very different risks in terms of your time on the leadership side than there are on the clinical side. So let's start with the support piece. One of the things that I hear from my clients who go from clinic to admin, whether that's 100 to 0, 0 to 100, or some type of hybrid where it's like, hey, I still am practicing in the C-suite as well. One of the biggest culture shocks for them is the politics. And I'd love for you to react to this. Physicians, in my experience, physicians are very efficient, which means I'm just going to go to the place that gets the thing done that I need the quickest. That's not how the business world works. I often tell physicians, if you're going into the big meeting, what's even more important than that is the meeting before the meeting, right? And so the politics is, I think, a layer of the reality of being an executive that physicians are just not ready for or very surprised by. What's your reaction to that?
2 parts. It's a fabulous question. So go back to the point about the potential for younger, newer physicians to be exploited by the system, by the structure. And we talked about unforeseen circumstances that exploit that physician further in terms of picking up call, doubling the booking, adding extra access on another day. A physician executive can be exploited in the same way because they haven't been in the universe of admin long enough to know what are the perks of admin. How does an administrator get work done? Because we're brought up by a fee-for-service productivity model, we are, to your point, constantly always getting stuff done. And I'm not going to wait for something. I'm just going to get it done. If I can't get the order carried out, I'm going to carry out the order myself. I'm going to get it done. The problem is in the C-suite and the surrounding levels of the C-suite, that's not how people work. And they'll sit back and watch you just work your tail off for no extra compensation, no extra support. Why hire a secretary? Why let them have more than a half of an EA support? Because that guy or that gal gets it done. We love having that person on the team because we can sit back and have more meetings while that person gets. So I do think there's a real risk of being exploited, which then goes to the second point, is if you hire me to be your CMO, I want to be developed to be just like the team behaves. I want to know how to delegate. I want to know how to be at the meeting before the meeting. I want to be part of the politics of it. I want to be strategically thinking like you are. And if you just hire me to be a fireman and one day you think I'm going to be the fire chief, hell no, I want to be the fire marshal. I want to be on top of the firehouse and top of all the firemen and firewomen. That's why we call it the Fire Chief Podcast, because we want to elevate people all the way to that marshal level. So I think the same risks occur that you're not asking the right questions because you don't know the landscape, and you are not treated fairly because you didn't know it. Yeah. That's my response.
Yeah. I think that's such a salient response. And I'm sure a lot of people who are listening, one, felt that through their experience as well.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about, again, hybridizing these notions. We didn't talk a lot about it, but we talked about the safe exit strategy in an employed physician model, a practicing clinician. And within those are things like non-compete and restrictive covenants that can shape an entire career and can really interfere with the exit. Happy to hear about that if you want to share about it. But more importantly, how might that apply to a physician leader role, especially if they're 50-50 or 70-30? And it got a little side hustle practice in the emergency room, or they're taking hospitalist shifts, or even anesthesiology shifts, and they lose their administrative title, or they separate from the organization. Are they stuck in that non-compete world? So what should a physician leader be understanding before they themselves sign it, whether they are in practice or not?
Yeah, that's a really, really thoughtful question.
I'm not going to give you any easy questions, Ethan. These are all
these have all been incredibly thoughtful. Let me just touch on the non-compete. I'm not even going to really go deep into it, but I get the phone call enough from physicians who say, how enforceable is my non-compete? Well, the only true way to test that is to violate it, right? So it's one of those academic questions that only has a practical answer. And so I tell physicians, when I am negotiating contracts for my clients, I operate from the position that the non-compete is 100% enforceable. And then we need to operate around that, right? So how do we then make sure the penalties are minimal? How do we make sure the physician's risk of exposure to lawsuit is minimal? I think physicians would be better served by assuming they're enforceable than trying to figure out how enforceable they are. This is an impossible question. But now let's go back to how you end your contract. And frankly, it's like ending a relationship, right? It's never smooth or fun or easy. I have a number of executives that I work with who have come from whether it's clinical side or academics and gone into leadership. And we're thinking in those situations a lot less about non-compete and can I work somewhere else. We're thinking a lot more about how do I get out of this contract safely? What are the penalties for early termination? If you got any bonuses, things like that.
Yeah, I think some subtle nuances for you and our listeners to think about. Sometimes in a hybrid role, a language that's used to someone who's, part-time clinician, part-time medical director or administrator is, well, we cannot exceed a certain value to your medical directorship because we'll violate fair market value standards and start clause, which is rarely true because if you're only asking them to work a half or three quarters of the time, you're not really going to, it's not like you pay them a full salary of the neurosurgeon and then give them another full administrative salary by which you've blown away FMV. So that doesn't happen. But what does get lost in translation is back to the with cause or without cause. If I separate you from my employment, Dr. Physician, sir, I'm going to also ask you to resign from the medical staff. And if I co-terminate your medical staff privileges, I guess you'll have to find another place to practice. And I'm not sure you'll get recredentialed anyway because of some of the way we've created this terminology. And if you want to collect severance, you're not going to work for the next 12 months in this region. So there's a lot of language that can be baked into these hybrid roles to effectively kick someone out of the local ecosystem. Although it doesn't come across as a non-compete or a restrictive covenant, make it darn hard to get back to a place of equity and fairness. So let's come back to the physician leader. Sometimes what happens is you're under these 50-50 models and you're on a productivity for your clinic work, and then you get this stipend for your administrative work. And then one day someone says, you're ready to be an associate CMO or a full-on CMO. And that you're so hungry for this contract. And then one day they don't actually give you a contract. They give you a job description and a letter of offer, and you accept the letter with a signature, and there's no actual contract because you are now on administration. Now, I'm saying this to a fella who's been on the inside and on the outside and every side in between. Do you believe me when I say that sometimes a physician executive literally gets no contract, just a signature?
Of course. Are you kidding me? Of course I believe it. I see this all the time. Absolutely.
So here's the challenge, right? You were in practice, and then one day you were acquired, and then you're under an employment agreement, and then you become a chief medical officer, and suddenly there's no contract. But the guys up in the C-suite that have come before you, they've got all this extra stuff happening to them. They're getting all this additional compensation and opportunities, and you don't get it. Why does that unfold? I think it goes back to the doctor just doesn't know how the game is played. And we should be advocating for educating and alerting people to how that world works. Would you agree with that, or do you have additional thoughts on the matter?
Every good CEO out there is renegotiating their insurance contracts every year. And if you think they're missing a year, it got busy with no, because that impacts the bottom line in a massive way. But when I talk to physicians and say, hey, when was your last pay raise? When was the last time you had a second opinion on your pay? Well, Ethan, it's been 10 years and I think what I make is fair. Or it's not too bad for me. So far too often, physicians will just accept what they're offered from a person of authority without questioning, is this fair? And is this what someone else who's similarly credentialed, educated, experienced, is this similar to what they would get in this situation?
Yeah. And you shared with me a very thoughtful point of view about greed when it comes to, in general terms, physicians that are working with you. Can you expand?
Far too often, I have to tell my physicians, greedy is a dirty word when you work with me, because one of the first things they'll say is, well, Ethan, I don't want to be greedy, or I don't want to come across as greedy. It's like, well, then let me be greedy for you, right? Because if you need someone to be the bad guy, I'll be the bad guy. But far too often, physicians will feel like there is tension between me being a good doctor, team player, and supportive of my organization, and asking for what's fair. It's like, no, in order for you to do this thing longer, you need a fair, supportive, collaborative environment, right? At some point, if that imbalance becomes too great, something's going to break. And unfortunately for us in the American healthcare system, it's usually physicians.
Yeah. Well stated. When might you consider a physician? And again, let's try to come back to physician leadership, but you go anywhere it takes you. When the doctor is in a position of leverage, And how do they recognize and use that leverage professionally without burning any bridges?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Now let's just for a moment talk about when they have zero leverage.
Sure.
Because this is the one I see most frequently. It's the doctor, and actually you said it earlier, it's the firefighter who gets promoted, right? So it's the really good physician that executives get along with that they then promote to become the medical director or the service line leader or program leader. And they find out the hard way that like, oh, this is not at all what it's cracked up to be. But sorry, the leverage point is if I am going from the clinic to the C-suite with no options, they're going to exploit you. And I don't mean that to say like they're a bad organization or company. I'm saying it is in the organization's best interest to pay you as little and get as much from you as possible, ethically. And so what's going to happen is they're going to tell you, well, you're a first-time executive, Dr. Scheinbart. We can't pay you more than experienced executives. Or, well, this is what other executives are making. Internal equity. We don't want to screw up our HR algorithms, which of course never, anyways, you never get to see them. So I think, and I'd say that the last piece is, it's like, hey, you're a team player. Like just come on, just take this role. We'll reevaluate in a year, in 6 months. And so when physicians go from the clinic or OR to the C-suite, in your same organization, that is a really, really tough road to climb. Even when you have me in your corner, I'm really, really good at what I do. That's a really difficult situation. So I would say if you're going to go to leadership, be intentional about it. Get options, look at offers. But if it's like, hey, I'm just going to grow here, cool, but be ready to not accept, right?
So,
that's your leverage.
Yes. So the leverage is not accepting it just because that's the way they say that it is. And so networking with people like you, with me, people, your clients that you've worked with, form yourself of the politics to have the leverage of how it works. I tell you the one exception, if I were to come back as a chief medical officer, I want to go to a hospital or a system where the individual before me was a neurosurgeon. Because the neurosurgeon probably walked out of the OR earning $1 million a year and said, well, if you want to hire me to be a CMO, you got to keep me whole. Give me $1 million. And I come in and go, well, I want what that guy had.
I love that.
I want what that guy's having. And I will tell you that part of the challenge that the HR conversations are in the C-suite, and part of it is, some of that information is shared with the board because the higher compensated physicians, whether they're employed or on the admin side, those numbers are part of the fiduciary obligation of the board, the finance committee, or executive committee to review that stuff. And doctors don't really know this. And the fact of the matter is, if you're following a pediatrician, that pediatrician probably made far less than you as a specialist, say an anesthesiologist. And you've got to be very thoughtful about whether you're getting what's fair for you versus what's fair for the organization, because the organization may have had the advantage of having a hospitalist turned CMO and kept him or her whole. But a specialist is going to make a premium on that. They kept that person whole. And then they come back and say, well, we can't pay you that. Well, you did. So we're digressing, but does that make any sense to you?
100%. And I think you hit the nail on the head when you said be able to walk away. Far too often it's kind of assumed that they'll take it or they know they're going to take it because of relationships, proximity, familiarity, which, okay, you can do that, but just go in with both eyes open that you're going to be taking a hometown discount. The other piece I would add to that is making sure that you have adequate resources. So that could be, I often encourage, especially for my surgeon clients who go into leadership, have them invest in a coach for you and a professional coach, not because you need remedial education, but because there's going to be this whole layer of interpersonal interactions that's going to be new to you. Like you can't, and I say this respectfully, but like you can't talk to a vice president of business development the way you talk to a nurse, right? In the OR. Like that's just not going to fly. The last piece I would throw in that I think is really important is know what your success metrics are, know how they're evaluating your performance. So a lot of times you'll just see this, like physicians will call me. It's like, Ethan, I'm working really hard. I feel like I'm doing a really good job. Everyone on this side loves me, but I'm not getting the credit on this side. So I would just say that's another one of the things I see is lack of clarity around success.
Yeah.
So is that, growth? Is that quality? Is that patient or physician satisfaction? What are those metrics that you as an executive are being evaluated on, because they're not at all going to translate to what you did as a physician generally.
Yeah, I would endorse everything that you just said and that was one of the topics I was hoping we would talk about, how to be very intentional on that upward career trajectory. I want role clarity. I know things get fuzzy, things get busy. There's always things that bubble up. But tell me what I'm working toward. What are those metrics or those measures or the performance areas that we all agree is success? And I want them now, and I want them early. I want them off. I don't want them to drift, and I don't want them to get lost. And let's get it in an email or a piece of paper. And then I can use those to say, look, I performed. I performed here, and I want to stay here, or I'm leaving because my spouse, took a better offer. You need to have those things, and career growth through coaching, advising, mentoring, more academics, more learning. If you don't have that baked in, you will plateau, and people will begin to recognize that you're at the highest level you're going to be, and there's no further growth for you. So I endorse all of the things that you said relative around clarity and growth and building that upward movement. All right, last question for us. So let's say you're advising an aspiring physician leader, one who wants to really be in that executive role, work in the C-suite, and they're in that first conversation about their quote executive contract, and then they get that aha moment. It's not the same contract as they had when they were an employed physician. Any key principle to orient themselves beyond what we've already talked about to set them up for the next 10, 12, 15 years?
Yes. I would say first, make sure the foundation is solid. The three things we talked about in terms of life balance, practice support, professional development. Know how to safely get out of the contract when the time is right, because no matter how much you love that organization, statistically, it's not likely that it's going to be the only place you work for the rest of your career. So know how to get out of it. I would say, and this, I wasn't expecting to go here, but I would just say, believe in yourself as a physician. I think a lot of times there's this expectation that you have to be perfect, that you have to be flawless, the smartest person in the room, you have all the answers. And when you go from clinic to leadership, it is an entirely different world. And you are going to learn some lessons the hard way, no matter what. Even if you do if you and I, if we put a guide together, it's like, here's the 99 things you need to look out for. You're going to find the 100th one, right? As a new physician leader. So I would just say, be patient with yourself, know that you're in that role for a reason, but give yourself grace and patience that just as you were learning the clinical side, you're now learning a new skill set. And this is not just with your hands. A lot of this is up here. And so, and I don't mean intellectual, I mean emotional, right? Understanding motives and incentives and political posturing. And I think that for physicians, really good physicians, can be really shocking. And they tend to doubt themselves and feel like, well, I thought I was better than this. And I'll just share a quick story of myself, just so I'm not like telling them it's just them. When I finished law school, I came back to work at a hospital. So I had done that my whole career before law school, during law school, moved to Colorado after. I became a manager of supply chain, which many physicians are familiar with. And when I became the manager, I thought, I'm going to be amazing. I love people. People love me. This is going to be awesome. And what I realized is managing people is very different from getting along with people. And it was jarring for me to not be as good at that as I thought I would be. And I say that's probably putting it really mildly. I was spiraling. And so I want to encourage physicians that you're not going to be good at it immediately. You're going to learn a lot of things the hard way. But if you have the right mentorship, coaching, support in your corner, you will get through those growing pains eventually.
I am in full agreement with you. It's like going into the boxing ring. Really, there are usually in a prize fighting match 12 rounds. Now, you may get knocked out in round 4. You may get knocked out. You may knock the other person out. But there's a time limit, and there's a time limit on an executive career for most people. So know your exit strategy. Get out of the ring clean. If you lose, pick up the fight somewhere else. It's okay. But real good fighters, here's what they don't do. They're not afraid to get punched in the face. In fact, the best fighters know how to take a punch in the face. And as Mike Tyson said, everyone has a plan until you get punched in the face. Here's the deal. Physicians are afraid of failure. They're afraid of making mistakes. And that constrains them to be a successful executive business leader, because many businesses fail before they ever succeed. And you do have to learn how to fail and take the punch and stretch out of your comfort zone. And there are only a few ways to do it. Working with folks like you, Ethan, and working with the CMO group. The CMO group will take you out of your comfort zone and make you the best version of that executive you could possibly imagine. You cannot do it on your own. Well, listen, this has been a fantastic show. I thank you. I think we're going to have you back at some point. And I won't throw any stones at the Broncos, because by then they may be back better than ever. So, Ethan, any last words or comments before we wrap it up?
No, I'm just super grateful to get to talk with you, Dad. I just want to amplify the last bit of your message. I just think that having mentorship and coaching like the CMO group is invaluable. And a lot of times there might be this barrier of, I don't know how to ask for help or who to ask for help. It's like, what's the harm in just having a conversation about what you're going through? And maybe that's the thing. Maybe you feel better just from that. But more often, knowing there's someone like the CMO group to be able to say, like, I understand what you're going through, I empathize, and I can be helpful. That's invaluable.
I appreciate that. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing your energy, your advocacy, your compassion for physicians first, always. How do folks contact you? How do they connect with you, Ethan?
I'd say the best way, old-fashioned, just call me, 720-471-0059. But if you're more digitally inclined, you can find us on any of the major socials, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, under Physician Agency. And at our website, www.rmpa.co. That's Robert Mary Paul Adam.co.
Excellent. Excellent. Ladies and gentlemen, you have been listening to the Fire Chief Podcast, the only podcast dedicated to the Chief Medical Officer. Want to learn more about how to be ready for your next contract, how to get all that you have earned and deserve? Then talk to our man in Denver, Ethan Nkana. Want to learn more about transforming your career and becoming a CMO? Then connect with me on LinkedIn, and I'll set you up with the CMO group and everything you need to lead in healthcare. I love talking with CMOs from all over the world. So get out there, be a winner, be passionate, be a leader. Remember, whatever you do, in the words of Sergeant Phil Esterhaus, let's be careful out there.